This is the Not So Korean podcast with Jay and Tim. I am Jason Verney.
And this is Timothy Ohm.
In this podcast series, we talk to one another and sometimes with special guests about what we know about Korea,
what we don't know about Korea,
what we want to know about Korea,
and occasionally what we don't want to know about Korea.
As you probably know, and as we always say, we usually record this live in UK's Koreatown itself. That's an area in and around New Malden. Yes, that's the largest Koreatown and Korean community in Europe. But I must add a quick statement from me, Jay, before passing you over to myself, on the fly and on the move somewhere else. Due to the nature of this episode, some segments, and in particular the sound quality, will differ slightly. Hopefully this won't affect your listening pleasure though. Enjoy! 안녕하세요. Hello, it's Jason, and I'm currently in Saigon, Ho Chi Minh, that is, in Vietnam. Now, a few things to talk about in this episode, and they all relate to Korea, and they all relate to me, not just me, myself, co-host Tim, me returning to Korea. There'll be news on that in a second. Koreanness in Vietnam, myself visiting recently Koreatown, UK, and various other Korean related aspects that touch on Korea itself, Koreatown, Korean friends, Korean places, related places, Korean foods and what have you. Now, just to give this is to sort of preempt you, if you hear any sounds, Vietnam style sounds, then apologies. I'm trying to record this as clear as possible in my recording space, temporary recording space in Saigon. What you might hear is perhaps the odd bit of traffic or a siren. I am actually 5 stories up in this wonderful apartment. Got a beautiful terrace with shrubbery that I water, sort of balcony terrace. But the other sound, and the other reason for mentioning the terrace, the other sound that you might hear if this podcast goes on for more than just a few minutes is now a bout of rain. Now, I've been here in Saigon, Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh, whatever you want to call it, HCMC, for less than a week at the moment. I left the UK on the 23rd or 20th. Gosh, I've only been here, let's say I've been here 6 nights. Yes, 6 nights. And one of those, I guess, it was the flight that I took from the UK to here. It did cross over another night. But yeah, so about a week ago I left the UK. Now, I was in Asia prior to that for 10 plus months, and 3 of those months pretty much were in Korea. I was also in Thailand. I experienced Laos for the first time, and I might have mentioned in another podcast, and I've definitely mentioned on social media, either on this Not So Korean podcast, Instagram, etc., but also my own Jay-Z and Verney one, social media, that, you know, in Laos there's a lot of Korean connections there. The Korean and Lao people have built this, I suppose, this bond of trust or something for businesses and helping organizations, and they've had, you know, similar histories, or at least tragedies. You could say tragic recent history, and Vietnam, you could say there's a lot of parallels with Korea. And again, there are businesses here. There's a big Korean area in Ho Chi Minh City, and I'm sure elsewhere in Vietnam, but it's something that I'm noticing this time around in Vietnam, because I came here, Verney was in Vietnam about 13 years ago. It could be 14, but I can't remember if it was 2009 or 2010. It was a couple of years before I went to, and I didn't anticipate that. There is a a child you might be able to hear in the background. I think it's the owner's child. So I'm actually sitting here right now with a box of choco pie, and the brand is Orion. I'm not promoting that, but it's all these countries. I think I even saw choco pie a few years back in India. This is a thing about Korean stuff. It has taken on, for good or bad, depending what it is. I'm not going to touch on other stuff like K-pop and things, but I'm talking about food with a choco pie. Now, I believe this, I've polished off, I finished 6 of those, not today, but I finished a box of 6. They seem smaller as well, the choco pies are a Korean brand. And here it says on it, banh choco pie, and that is a bit like banh mi, which is the bread. I believe it is. I mean, the good thing here in Vietnam, compared to places like Laos or Thailand, is that I can read the words. Doesn't mean I understand them, but I can read the Vietnamese, and I can read Korean, but you've got to use, at least it's English, the letters I'm used to in English, like the word bang. What have we got here? Tin. Now that might mean delicious, I'm not too sure. I have learnt a little bit of, I think delicious or tasty in Vietnamese is nong, but I might get the pronunciation wrong. So that's a great thing, I can read that. But yes, I just treated myself to some of those. A couple of nights ago I bought them in one of the many various different convenience stores. Now I even saw a GS25, there's a mini stop. I'm not in a heavily Korean area, but it doesn't really matter where you are in Ho Chi Minh, or at least I'm in District 1, which if you walk 10-15 minutes or less, you're in the kind of the walking street, the main sort of area, and then you go a bit more and you've got all the relevant. I haven't actually done many of the relevant sightseeing stuff that's here, but I've still got time. And my next venture, or my next adventure, will be Korea. Now I'm recording this at the very end, pretty much the very end of August, but when you hear this, it's probably going to be in the first week of September, and I believe that I will be touching down in Korea by the end of September. So by the end of this month, if that's when you're listening to this. Another thing I've got sitting next to me is what we're called in Korea, not bibimbap, not a gimbap, but a samgap. Let me get this right. Samgap gimbap. So it's the triangle gimbaps that you see in convenience stores and elsewhere in Korea. But you also find a version, or maybe the original version, one of the versions in Japan, I believe, and elsewhere. And I just started to eat one here, and this one is a kind of a very standard, I guess. No, it's not tuna mayonnaise; it's a prawn mayonnaise one. But you get the idea. I would prefer a spicy one, but they're all kind of meaty ones these days. Maybe you might find if you're in Korea itself, you might find a kimchi only one. But the one here, I was actually vegan for 7 months before leaving for my big trip of 10 months, before going back to the UK. But these days I'm being a bit more of a flexitarian and trying to be healthy, trying to be ethical, but occasionally having fish and maybe even something else, so as well as obviously vegetarian food. So I'm sitting there with that, but I did see one yesterday or a couple of days ago, which I posted on social media somewhere, and it had 3 elements to it, of countries, 3 different countries to it. It had Korea, because it's what I would call a Korean food, a triangle gimbap, a samgap gimbap. But also, it was Vietnamese. It's Vietnamese writing and presumably made here by, I don't know if it's by Koreans or not, or whether it's imported, I don't know. But it also was a Thai flavour. It was, I think it was pad kra pao, and I have touched on pad kra pao probably once before at least. There is a guy I'm a kind of friends with, supporter of at least because of his charitable work, a YouTuber called Retired Working For You. You could say puts the tie in retired, working for you. He's a Canadian guy, just like Tim. He has a Korean wife. He used to own, with his friend, a reggae bar in Seoul, and I actually met him in Seoul on my last trip, just about a year ago, and not too long. We met in Itaewon, and it was not too long before those tragic stampede, the crush that happened in Itaewon. Anyway, but he does a load of stuff, and he always promotes Thailand, but he also, highlights all the great things about Korea. So I highly recommend his channel. That's Retired Working For You. Now, so that's the food out the way that's right next to me. Of course, I'm seeing food everywhere that's Korean related. You see bingsu places all around here in Vietnam. The first friend I met, or maybe the only friend, I might be meeting someone else before I leave Vietnam, but I met my friend the other day. Now I have never met her in Vietnam. First of all, we've only known each other 10 years, and I came to Vietnam last time about, as I said, 13 years ago or so. But we first met at a train station area in Korea. I remember, I think we were going between Daegu and Seoul. She did confirm this to me because I couldn't quite remember exactly where we were coming from too, but we remember, and we stayed in touch. We remembered significant parts of the meeting. But yeah, so I finally met her and we had a great day. She took me to this area. I think it's District 7 and I'm in District 1. It's not far from where she lives, but the area we went to eat was Vietnamese food in a shopping mall, but it was heavily Korean area, community, let's say. I mean, we had Lotteria, Lotteria, the burger company. I say burger company. So that's Korean by Lotte, love or hate the conglomerates, they're everywhere. And also inside that same shopping mall was CGV, which is the cinema chain, one of the cinema chains in Korea. And there's all kinds of other Korean-related things around. Oh yeah, there's Tous les Jours, which is the bakery that's trying to pretend it's French, I guess, but it's Korean. A bit like Paris Baguette. What are the other ones? There's one or two others. But one of them is Tous les Jours, I think is owned by CJ Entertainment. But that's one of the chaebols, one of the conglomerates even. So it was great to meet my friend. She's Vietnamese, but we met in Korea. Just to really touch on the trip before, when I was in Asia for 10 months, before I went back to the UK, I met my at least 1-2 Korean friends in Thailand, one of them in Chiang Mai, who was actually part of a project that was in London in 2012. We've remained friends, met many times. We've probably met more times in Korea now than London, or we did meet a few times in London. I even interviewed her actually for a documentary that I was making at the time. Footage of what might see the light of day. I've got it in front of me here, some of that footage. And it was the musical Gumok, which was regarding the comfort women. A very emotional 1-hour musical that was performed and rehearsed, of course, but performed twice in one day by director and put on by director Joe Cho. But I became friends with quite a few people involved with that project. But I was fortunate enough, drifting off the topic here, but fortunate enough to be commissioned to film the event, and so I have all the footage, and sometimes I upload it to my YouTube channel. And let's get that out of the way while we're speaking about that, and then we'll touch on the last interview briefly and future interviews. Meeting Tim in London and in UK, and a couple of other things, and of course my visit to Korea. But just to touch on the YouTube aspect, so if you listen to these podcasts on Spotify or Apple Music or whichever your favorite place is, that's brilliant. Thanks for listening. Thanks for following. Thanks for subscribing, whatever you want to call it. Really appreciate that. With regards to the YouTube channels, there's two, which is the Not So Korean podcast. Now that doesn't have a lot of subscribers, but it does get quite a few views. We changed the episode very slightly because otherwise YouTube won't allow two identical episodes to be on both. But essentially it's me putting a few seconds on the beginning explaining exactly what I've just explained to you. But if you go to my channel, which is Jason Verney, at Jason Verney, or it's just Jason K-Town Verney, just put Jason Verney, you'll find eventually there's more than one of me in some ways, but you'll see, you'll find it. What I will say is the last video that you'll see on there, the last episode on that channel was the episode 34, where I interviewed An Son-jae, brother Anthony, and very happy with that interview and episode, and had some feedback on that episode. I believe there was some, and also there's other stuff on that channel. Now after that video, I want to say this because there's an important aspect of the Not So Korean podcast in the videos that followed that. So that video was 7 videos ago, the episode 34 interview with An Son-jae. After that, there's a micro-budget filmmakers podcast, which I also do with a guy, Rob Shambro. But then you've got a very tiny video. It's one of those YouTube shorts. So it's a little trip. It's a 1-minute Busan train trip, I believe, to the airport. But the most recent, in the most recent 4 videos put on there, as I record this now, you've got one that says Flicks, so Flicks episode, podcast episode 71. Now that's a podcast I've been running for a long time, way before this Korean related podcast that I started with Tim. But the reason I'm mentioning it now is that there was an episode that I put out. There was a load of episodes I was recording on the fly when I was in Korea in 2022. And although I've included one, I'm going to include more in this episode, in this podcast, the Not So Korean podcast. I've also uploaded some of those into my Flicks podcast, and there's a reason why it's called Flicks, which relates to Korea but also film, life, and other things. But I uploaded it into that. I didn't really promote it, but I wanted to. It didn't actually find its way to YouTube, and because I hadn't recorded a Not So Korean podcast, or hadn't put together one, even though I've still got at least 2 interviews in the can that are going to be heard, hopefully, by you guys, and there's others to come. That one I just had to post on my YouTube channel, so at least people because there's quite a few people. Well, there's a handful of people that I know tend to follow our podcasts via YouTube, and often I think via my YouTube channel. Maybe they go to the other one as well, I don't know. But this particular one, just to cut to the chase, as they say, I touch on, it's kind of my thoughts on Korea and general life changes at the time. I mean, the very fact that I was deciding to stay out in Asia for my longest time. Before that it'd been like 5 months, but it was also my longest time in Korea. Ultimately I was there for 3 months, and I'd never stayed there that long, 5 weeks before. But I was also talking about the film festival that my film was at in Jochiwon, the area of Girum near Mia Sogori, those areas not too far from Haewa area in Seoul, and also touches on comfort women, filmmaking, accommodation, and other things of being in Korea at the time of the pandemic, for example. So I would recommend checking that out, just because it's forming part of a different podcast, but I've put it on that channel. Entirely up to you. And there's another video regarding the musical I mentioned earlier, a 12-minute clip that I think is the 8th clip that relates to the Comfort Women, the Gumok musical, the Comfort Woman musical from 2012. And also, most recently, as I'm looking at it right now, there's another snippet, a 4.5-minute snippet with my pals, my friends, my activist pals, mates in Gangjong in Jeju, the ones who are opposing the Navy base. So I highly recommend going to check those out, because even though you might not have heard a new Not So Korean podcast for a while, those are there. On to my visit to the UK. I'll try to keep this short and sweet, and I might have touched on this in episode 33, prior to the interview with Anson J, Brother Anthony. But I was intending to, of course, go to Koreatown. I actually went back for family reasons and couldn't wait to come back to Asia, but it was great to see family. I also met quite a few Korean related friends, either in Koreatown, that's New Malden, near Kingston upon Thames, Hanguk Hapa. I met Tim, of course I met Timothy. I had 2 visits to Koreatown, New Malden. One of them was in June, not long after I'd arrived. I also went to London for one of our Sewol ferry. If you know about the Sewol ferry, I'm sure you do if you've listened to this podcast before. Normally our thumbnails have got the yellow ribbon, and that represents the Sewol ferry, the loss of lives, the loss of children, and just the whole, the answers, the questions that haven't been answered. I went to London for one of those, our monthly one. Of course, I'd missed 9 or 10. We've had a few Zoom calls, I think 1 or 2 Zoom calls at least while I was away. And then I returned there towards the end of my trip. I think it was in the last week of my trip, I went back to New Malden. So I went there a second time, but this time I also made a little staycation for myself. Because I was staying over with family in a different area, I decided, or at least near my family at times, I decided to have a staycation in Kingston. So I had 2 nights in Kingston, but 3 days in total. So of course I went to New Malden on more than one occasion and met friends. And also I built that around the latest Sewol Ferry memorial with my friends, Andrew, Philip, Sarah, Cathal, other passers-by, 1 or 2 that I knew anyway. Popped to the Environment Centre, which is somewhere where we've done a podcast from before. In fact, you can even see it in one of our video episodes from quite a few episodes ago, actually. I think it's the one, I think, where we do the Soul Box unboxing, a great little brand in South Korea, and I should be meeting the founder of that as well when I'm in Korea. So from Koreatown, that was great. It was good, even though I didn't have a plan to go back to UK. I did initially, then I didn't, but then I needed to, or I felt like I should. But before long, I was on my way to Gatwick with my case, in hand and a couple of bags, because there's a lot of life changes going on for me, and I'm hoping to stay out this part of the world for longer than I did last time, so for longer than 10 months, so at least a year, who knows how long, but that's the plan, which is great for my visits to Korea, potentially. Of course, I'm going to base myself somewhere. Now, my trip to Korea, though, I'm going to be there, all being well, I'm going to be there at the end of September. By the end of September, I like to get there at that time of year anyway. Last time I was there earlier, but that was because of a film festival that was taking place more in the sort of summertime, so I stayed until November last time. But this time, and this is where I've got a bit of a decision to make nearer the time. Well, I have to make some decisions very soon, really, actually, regarding that, because of having flights out of Korea. When you go in, you're meant to have a flight out, of course, or at least something booked, even if it can be changed. So I will be going there, and my birthday is sort of around that time, early October. And so it's almost been tradition that I have something, a little gathering then. I don't drink these days. It's been 4 years since I had any alcohol. But I would like to have a little gathering with friends, old and new. Sometimes it's a handful, sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. I was even contemplating going straight from Vietnam, as if I don't go to Thailand on the way to Sewol. I've still got time to make that decision. I was debating whether I go straight from Vietnam to Busan. I do have sort of a handful of friends there, and because that's another reason for going there before October, or before October gets properly underway, because the Busan International Film Festival, which last year I managed to catch about 23 or more films, not all Korean, but most of them Korean. It's the International Film Festival, so you have all the big contenders for the Oscars as well, those films, and it's not just Korean, but I like to use a great place to catch a load of Korean films early as well, you know. So I will immerse myself in that. I've already got my festival pass, so that's that. But what I'm going to come on to here is that it will be an interesting time for me as to how long I stay for, because I haven't been in Korea in December, and of course I know it's cold. I mean, the UK is cold anyway, but I know there's different levels of cold, different types of cold, different scenery, you know, in the cold, in that temperature. So I will have to decide if I go at the end of September, I could stay until the end of December, which would cover Christmas, but I probably. I don't know if I'm going to do that. I might leave mid-December, but whatever happens, even if I stay a week into December, for me personally, I want to do that, because every time I've been to Korea, or the more times I've been, this will be my 9th time I've been to Korea, in more than a decade. I think my first trip was 2012. Yeah, it was. But I always want to ensure that I've experienced a different month, even if it's. I remember once I was in Korea until November, but only like 2 days into November, but I felt like, yes, I've been in Korea in that month. And then last time I was there until middle of November, so even if I'm there until the start of December, I will be happy, you know. I'm gradually kind of ticking off different months. It's like it took me a while before I actually experienced a June or a July in Korea. You know, maybe in April, maybe in May before, but yeah, so I'm, you know, of course those colder months like January and February anyway are going to be tough ones to do, unless you arrive at the end of February hoping that March gradually gets cooler. But it could be unlucky that, you know, March is just as cold or colder, especially with the world right now, who knows. But anyway, so I'm looking forward to it in many ways. I haven't planned anything itinerary-wise apart from the film festival. I will base myself in Busan anyway for about a month. I want to go back to Gwangju. I might revisit Mokpo. I will probably do another temple stay. It took me like 8 trips to even do one temple stay, and thanks to my Korean Buddhist friend, she's a sunim, so she's a Korean Buddhist monk. She found me a place, or let me go to a place. It was less of a tourist one. Here comes the rain. I'm just gonna let you hear that for a second, if you can. So even though, you know, you might not have heard that at all, but as this is the room. This room apartment is double glazed, but you know, when it's so heavy in Southeast Asia, it's a different kind of rain to what we get in the UK. Oh, at times it can be similar, yeah. But again, talking about UK and Asia, of course I'm used to cold weather. I've grown up with it, you know, for decades. I know cold weather. But going to a place where you know, Korea, I know it's meant to be beautiful there at times. I know it's meant to be freezing there at times. It's like people say about the summer, but the summer I can cope with because of, you know, my experience in other countries, and you know, it's a bit of sun. It doesn't matter that it's ridiculously hot, it's sun. Of course it does. I mean, here in Ho Chi Minh, I'm walking around and suddenly, you just realize how hot it is. And I think it's moderately hot at the moment, like 34. Now that is hot, but of course there's different levels of hot. You get up to the 40s. See, it's now kicking off outside with regards to the rain and the plants and the wind. Obviously the plants aren't kicking off, but they're getting affected by being swayed left and right. So I think I've covered a lot of ground and what I wanted to cover. So I've spoken a little bit about Vietnam, Koreanness in Vietnam. As I mentioned this, another friend of mine, someone who's in the film business as well, actually, but and works a big Korean director as well. But they invited me to a wedding in Vietnam before, and I couldn't make it due to time scales or where I was. I couldn't make it. So he's Korean. He got married in Vietnam. So I've always known there's been this strong connection with Vietnam and Korea, business-wise as well. I mean, it's Cambodia as well. There's that as well, and Laos, and Thailand has got its Korean connections. Big connections, big links, big cultural connections, especially whether it's the dramas or music or other things, or other fashion, But what I was going to say, I remember that from a Vietnam time. I wasn't in Vietnam, but my Korean friend had invited me to a wedding. And speaking of weddings, a Korean friend of mine who actually linked to that project I was mentioning earlier, back in London a decade ago, that musical. There's a wedding taking place, and it's in Sewol. Now I will have to make a decision. It might be when the film festival, I think it is when the film festival has already begun, and if I'm attending it from day one, it would mean me taking a break from that. But I can, of course, wedding is more important than one day at a film festival. Or there's a small chance that I might not be starting that film festival until after that wedding anyway. So yeah, it was great to be in the UK. At the time, I wasn't really feeling it. I had a bit of hot or heat wavy weather upon arriving mid-June, and my last week or so, few days in August, was also good weather. But in between that, it wasn't great for me. I'd sold myself a bit of a lie. I did achieve some things that I set out to. I've now got my good laptop as well as my secondary laptop, because when I went away on my last trip, which started in Korea because of that film festival, I'd taken my sort of a smaller laptop, but also my less, let's say, it was less new laptop, and it was I didn't care about it as much. But now I've got two with me, and I also changed my storage options, sort of downsized a little bit, sorted some other paperwork out with companies, saw my mum, family. That's the reason I went back. There was something I was wanting to go back for, to see my mother and family, and friends. And Tim, it was great to see Tim. We met briefly in New Malden, and we had a meal with Justina Jang from KBCE, with Hanguk Hapa, Deborah from Being Brazian, and that was in June, I believe. But then when I left, I met Tim very briefly again with a North Korean friend of mine as well. But with Tim, a couple of days before I actually did leave, when I was staying at my sister's, I wasn't staying too far from a town called Maidstone, but I was staying in the countryside area. So myself and Tim, we actually met there. Tim came over to see me, which I was really grateful for. And so we had a great day there. It was so funny because, and this is not Korean related, but someone shouted out my name, and I never go to Maidstone. The only time I've ever been to Maidstone before, I think, or that I can recall, is probably when I was in my party days years ago, when I would have gone to a nightclub a couple of times, maybe because we weren't allowed in another nightclub, I can't remember, but we would have gone in the evening. I don't remember, Maidstone. Maybe I drove around it with people or my own once, I don't know, but yeah, someone called out my name, and lo and behold, it was the Indian guy, Kerala guy, who ran a restaurant pretty much where I used to live in Kilburn, northwest London, and I used to see them almost daily, well, at least weekly, and they've opened up a restaurant there, and I was suddenly, I'd never go there, and myself and Tim, we weren't even going to take that road, we were going to walk down another road. We forked off down this road, and someone called out my name, and him and the chef I both know, and we had a meal there. Actually, it was a bit like a Korean experience in the fact that afterwards they said you don't have to pay. It was like service, like a free thing. Oh, I didn't expect that at all. The kind nature of these people. We had some Indian food, sort of middle of the afternoon or afternoon time. Anyway, so yeah, I think we saw one or two Korean related things in Maidstone, but we weren't there for that. We did go to Leeds Castle, which is not in the Leeds that it's the small Leeds, and we had a great time there as well. We got lost in a maze, and so thanks Tim for that. So the next episode, that might be one from Korea, it might be one from Vietnam, or it might be one of these other ones that I've recorded when I was on the go in Korea, or it could be one of those other interviews that I mentioned. But these episodes have gone from weekly. When I got back to the UK, I did try and get back on track. I did manage about 7. It kind of fell to fortnightly, and then it's kind of slipped by the wayside. But I don't want to give this podcast. I don't want to stop this podcast. I know, we've got guests that are really happy to be on the podcast. I like the community of people. We have a Facebook group, which not only we have the Facebook page, but there's a Facebook group, and we do have a little community there where people, they might comment. We have a very little chat, and it seems to be doing all right, and I enjoy doing these and talking about Korean culture, etc. So, and I'm also writing a couple of different films that relate to Korea. I'm working on a bit of a documentary video art project, and I'm working on a couple of scripts at least for my next fiction work. It could turn out to be a feature, a very short feature, or it could turn out to be a long short, but we will see. Okay, that's it, and I just want to wish you, everyone, all the best. Thank you. Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode. So that's all from us. 안녕히 계세요.